We're going to talk about a system failure and how that failure led the entire world to war in 1914.
Welcome to Cognitive Pleasure.
So what really caused the First World War? We all think we know the answer. It's the one we learned in school, right? That story, the standard one, it always starts with a single gunshot, an assassination. And then this whole tangle of alliances just pulls everyone in. But what if that's not the beginning of the story? What if it's actually the end? What if that single event was just the final, almost predictable crack in a system that was already breaking apart? What if the Great War wasn't some terrible accident, but a system failure, as inevitable in its own way as a market crash? That's the idea we're going to dig into. Okay, so to really get this, we have to rewind. We need to look at the world before 1914. It was a global system, a whole global order, really, that was built on flows. So think about the late 1800s. The world system basically ran on a few key things. You had the big European empires right at the center of it all. They were powered by this brand new engine, industrial production. And all of it, was connected by these massive global trade routes, which were pretty much dominated by the old guard, Britain and France. Now, the real fuel for this whole system was colonialism. And for what we're talking about today, let's set aside the morality of it for a second and just look at it as a machine, as a functional economic system. Its whole purpose was to control the flow of resources. The colonies, well, they were the source for raw materials, and they were also the guaranteed buyers for finished goods. You can see the cycle, right? You extract raw materials from the colonies, you ship them back to factories in Europe, you turn them into finished goods, and then you sell them right back to the colonies in other places. It was a really powerful loop. And in that world, being powerful meant one thing. You had to control those flows. But here's the thing. This system, as powerful as it was, had a huge fundamental flaw built right into it. It worked great, but only if you were one of the first ones in. And this leads us to what you could call the latecomers problem. Just look at the timelines here. It tells you everything. You've got Britain and France spending the entire 1800s building these massive global empires. Meanwhile, Germany, it doesn't even exist as a single country until 1871. But then, fast forward just a couple of decades to the 1890s, and its industrial output is just surging. It's becoming an economic powerhouse. And you can see the result of that timing difference so clearly on this chart. Look at the colonial territory. Germany is this new industrial giant, but it has this tiny piece of the colonial pie. This means it just doesn't have the same guaranteed access to raw materials, and, just as important, to markets that its rivals have. And this gets us to a really crucial point. If you're an ambitious latecomer, like Germany, you look out at the world and the global economy looks open. In theory, anyone can play. But in reality, the whole world is already divided up. It's already claimed. And that creates this deep structural frustration.
So you've got this really unstable situation. But for a while, it was actually managed. War wasn't a sure thing just yet. And that's because there was this period of incredible balance and restraint, mostly thanks to the work of one man.
Germany's first chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, he was a total pragmatist. He knew that Germany's real power came from its economy. He also knew that a big war in Europe would completely wreck the trade routes that the economy needed to survive. So, instead of picking fights, he used diplomacy and a complex system of alliances to keep everything in a delicate balance. And this is so important to understand. The peace you see in the late 19th century, it wasn't because everyone was getting along. It wasn't natural harmony. It was the result of constant, careful, active management. It was a managed peace, held together by restraint. But that restraint couldn't last forever. After Bismarck was pushed out, a totally new logic started to creep into the system. It was a logic of insecurity. And you start to see economic competition slowly curdle into strategic fear. With Bismarck gone, Germany's strategy changed. It started demanding its place in the sun. It wanted global status, so it started building a huge navy. It wanted more colonies. But the other powers, Britain and France, they didn't see this as Germany just trying to catch up. They saw it as a direct threat to their own position, to their own security. And right here, this is the critical shift. What used to be just economic competition, who gets the best markets, who gets the resources, it hardened into something way more dangerous. It became strategic fear. The game wasn't about who could make the most money anymore. It was about who was going to survive. This kicked off a really dangerous feedback loop of fear. Think about it. Country A builds up its military and says, hey, this is just for defense. But its neighbor, Country B, sees a bigger army on its border and thinks, that looks like a threat to me. So Country B builds up its military. And what does Country A see? It sees its neighbor building up an army, which just confirms its original fears, and so it goes. The suspicion gets deeper, and escalation just becomes the new normal.
So at this point, the whole system is just primed. It's like a powder keg. You have decades of this pressure building and building and building. All it needed was a spark. And we all know when that spark came, the summer of 1914.
In June of 1914, an assassin in Sarajevo kills the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And there it is, the spark. The event that, as we said at the beginning, is where the story usually starts.
But after everything we've looked at, we can see it in a totally different light, can't we? That event didn't create the tension, it just released it. It was the final release valve for all that pressure that had been building inside the system for decades.
So in the end, the system didn't collapse because of one gunshot. That one event just showed everyone how incredibly fragile the whole thing already was. The Great War didn't happen by accident. It happened because the world's operating system, an order built for a different time, just couldn't handle the pressures of modern industry, modern competition, and modern fear.